No. Greetings, welcome, and we're glad you joined our Friday night Bible study for Friday, October 3, 2025. I like to put the date on it just so that when it shows up later on YouTube, there'll be some link to reality, such as the crow. I've got to eat now. I spoke a little too soon last week. I hadn't heard anything about budget negotiations, so I didn't think, I thought maybe they'd gotten everything sorted out. There wouldn't be a shutdown. Well, I got egg on my face tonight. It's still shut down. The reason the reason, I mean, I'm not really a very close follower of news, but maybe the reason I didn't hear anything about it was because our lovely legislators were sitting around in D.C. on their little thingy-wingies doing nothing about it. And last I heard, they still haven't done anything about it. So, yeah. So if you're a critical government employee, you're working without pay right now. Like in the military or flight, air traffic controllers, so forth. They're considered uh, critical and necessary, so they're coming to work, but nobody's approved to pay them, so they're working on the assumption that they will get back pay and get paid for what they do, even if not right now. Rough situation to be in, and all because we can't love, we can't. We're humans. We're in a mess. This world is in a messed up pickle, and that's just one of the uh, symptoms, shall I say, of this world's broken condition. People get all up in arms about these things because people are going to get hurt. You have your right to get upset about these things, but ultimately, you're not going to fix it by who you vote for, because we voted for both sides, and we've got a system that only gives us two sides to vote from, and it just doesn't work. This world doesn't work. And I was having some odd thoughts a little earlier today. People like to quote you statistics and make up supposed connections where in fact there may not be any. For example, 100% of lawyers eventually die. 100% of preachers eventually die. Well, you can say it in a certain way and make it sound bad, but the fact is we're human. We are all dying as we sit here and speak. And we will eventually go the way of all those before us. That's just part of being human on a broken earth. It's not part of God's plan for this planet. It's just what is. Now, this computer, the one that we stream from, the one that's sitting in front of me that has the integrated webcam that you can see me through, all that, actually got its rest this week. I think I mentioned that last week, that I had finally found a way to get my tower computer in the office where I could use it on a temporary basis. And even so, it was kind of acting squirrely. It up and restarted on me just in the middle of things. Well, that's not something you like to have going on with your computer, because if you're in the middle of a document and you've just typed, 10 minutes of careful typing, and you've gone to click the save button and the computer restarts, that 10 minutes of work may well be gone. So that's not how you want your computer working. Well, it hasn't done that for nearly a week now. It's in there operating now and not doing it. And I think I figured out, I'm fairly confident because I know what not to do now, what was causing it to do that. One of the things that I did when I bought some new parts for the computer was I bought a gaming graphics card. So one of those things takes up 2 slots and has 2 fans on it. It has a lot of computing power inside of it. In fact, it has about half the RAM in that card that the whole computer does. You could get it with even more. And it has probably the same processing power or even more processing power than computer. It's kind of a little computer on a card that fits in there and drives your display. And you need those higher level ones in order to play 3D games, because what the game is going to do is send the 3D information and the location of the camera to the motherboard, and the motherboard is going to have to sit down and decide, okay, this is here, this is here, this is here, what am I going to put on the screen, where on the screen, with what brightness, all that. All those calculations, that card is going to have to do that in order to make that work. And if the card doesn't have a lot of processing power, like the earlier one that I had, it may only be able to cough up a frame or two every second, which makes it very hard to play a game. So once I got it going last week, I did try a couple of games that I had, and they were quite playable, but then the computer restarted. Well, I got to think, now wait a minute. I wonder. So I looked it up. I found out that my motherboard manufacturer had a page for my motherboard that listed the various processors you could put in it, along with the various levels of graphics card. And I looked up the combination that I had, and it said that I needed a 550 watt power supply. Yeah, I've been using the same power supply. I think the one I'm using right now, when I bought the case that I'm using, which was probably 10 or more years ago. At the time, it was an adequate, if not overwhelming, power supply. But it's only 400 watts. So what I figured out is, if I don't play the 3D games, I don't put a lot of load on that graphics card, it's not drawing enough power to cause problems, and the computer runs just fine. Although I've begun to wonder, maybe that's why I've lost so many solid state drives in the last few years, that it's not running quite right. So I looked at that requirement and I added a little to it, and I ordered, and it just came today. That 650 there is the wattage of this new power supply. So I've got some other things coming for it. When they all come in, I'll go ahead and update that, and hopefully it'll work for me. So one thing at a time, you just keep working, and you learn as you go. And when news comes out, then you have to learn the new stuff. Yeah. And so life's kind of a continuous learning experience. And this, I'm going to offer this just as an observation, but I think it does relate to what we say about God and about interhuman relationships in this group. I don't believe there is anybody in this world that I couldn't learn something from. If you go around thinking that you're better than other people, then you're not going to learn from those people. But even if they're mentally retarded, they have probably, through life experience, picked up some things, and there is probably something that you could learn from them. So if you go through life with that attitude, this person in front of me is a potential learning opportunity. I ought to pay close attention and see if there's something I can learn from this person. You might find life goes a little easier, and you might find life a little easier to cope with in the process. Well, enough of that stuff. We have posted and promised from last week we're going to begin the book of Job. So I think we've done enough of the chitter chatter. Let's bow our heads so we can begin. My Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for for life, and for those of us that have it, health and strength and the ability to proceed through life. And more than that, the ability to ponder your character, and as we open the written word, to seek to find out what we can learn about your greatness, goodness, and love from what we read, even in the Old Testament. So as we begin this examination of the book of Job, we want the Holy Spirit to help us understand what is right and what is wrong out of this book, and to give us the blessing that we need for this time through what we read. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. This is one of the things that I put a post-it note up to tell me to do, because there have been weeks when I have forgotten to do that and gone through the whole thing, and you people couldn't read what I was reading. I think that's kind of important. Now, a few notes about the book of Job. One of the things that I had to do to get a degree in my undergraduate career was I had to take a literature class. And, kind of interesting, because when I was in high school, I was in an alternative school, so they weren't fully accredited, and they were able to use non-accredited teachers. And one of the persons who showed up, he was actually my roommate for a while, he was also a teacher, was a guy who had been going to school out in California and had left the school when they insisted that he couldn't get his degree without taking a literature class. And he objected, there are people like this, to studying fictional literature. Now, fiction, that's not true. That shouldn't be part of your intake. You've got to guard the gateways to the soul, so you shouldn't be reading fiction. And he made a big deal out of it. Well, I didn't. So I took a literature class. The lady who taught the class later produced texts used in a new hymnal. So it was kind of a neat thing to observe. The university she came from, I found out just, I think, yesterday. I was, browsing Google Earth, and I happened to look at the place, and it didn't name the place I thought it would name, so I did a Google search and found out the place has been closed since 2018. But anyway, so she put the class together as if it was a study of travel literature. So the first thing that they studied was the Odyssey. And I got into the class a little bit late. I won't tell you all that happened there. It was kind of interesting. But anyway, I got into the class. They did Moby Dick. They did North of the Orient by Anne Morrow Lindbergh. They did, we went through a bunch of literature. North of the Orient, by the way, is not fiction. It is Anne Morrow Lindbergh's account of her trip with her husband to fly the route to the Orient. And North of the Orient essentially shows what they do today. If you're going to fly from New York, say, to Beijing, you're going to cross very close to the North Pole, because the way the globe is laid out, that's the shortest route. And they had to do it with stops because they didn't have the long haul aircraft that we have today. And she wrote a story of all the things that happened while they were on that trip. Anyway, one of the remarks that professor made at some point involved the book we're about to start, the book of Job. And she said, Job has a rat story. We've mentioned that. The first two chapters and the last chapter are kind of the narrative portion of the book. The rest of it's all poetry, what these people are saying to each other, and then at the end, what God says to Job. And it's in poetry probably to aid in memorization. the Hebrews at that time didn't have a written language. Written language was relatively new to humans, and humans had the brain power in those days to memorize stuff. So things were passed down mouth to ear, essentially, and things were rendered in poetic format to make them easier to memorize. And so the discussions that these men had, as related in the bulk of this book, were rendered poetically so they could be remembered. I'm on pet little theory about this. Throughout most of the book, you hear what one of the friends says, and then what Job says, and what another of the friends says, and then what Job says, and then what another of the friends says, and then what Job says. And it goes through that cycle almost 3 times. But then towards the end, there's somebody else who shows up. What he says indicates he's been there all the while, but he hasn't taken part in the discussion so far. But now he feels like the 3 who have confronted Job haven't done the job they should have done. So he's younger. He thinks age before beauty, whatever. They ought to go ahead of him. But now that they have failed, he's going to make a stab at it. He's going to try it. And he pontificates for several chapters, and then all of a sudden God shows up, and everybody has to eat a little humble pie, Job included. I think maybe, and you know, I'm very uncertain about this, it's just a possibility. That man was Moses himself. That as he assisted his father in caring for his father's livestock, he wandered around the region, and he was able to show up for what was going on here. And we have the story because he was there for it, and he relates it. I don't know, maybe, maybe not. The point that this literature professor was making was that at the end of the rap story, and that's W-R-A-P, not R-A-P, by the way. At the end of the rap story, Job gets back essentially everything he lost, plus a little bit. From a literature standpoint, that's kind of a bad move. That's not good literature, she said. Well, okay. It could be that since this was based on real events, the author felt compelled to relate what actually happened, and not what would look good in terms of literature. Anyway, so the other thing that I'd like to address briefly here is we've talked about the Jews not having a concept of a devil until after the Babylonian captivity. And someone might say, well, what about the book of Job? If in fact Moses wrote the book of Job, it talks about Satan. But remember, Satan is the Hebrew word for accuser. So all the book really says is that this was going on in heaven, and an accuser shows up and he accused Job. Well, that's what you expect an accuser to do. So there may not have been a clear personal identification of this interloper in the councils of heaven like we see it when we read it today, because the Jews didn't have a background to understand that. So the other question that gets asked, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the end of the book, is some people wonder, well, you know, God confronts Job and he tells him this and that and the other thing, and he never tells Job why all this happened. But I would argue that God did tell Job what was going on and why this happened to him. He didn't tell him explicitly. He told it to him in symbolic language. Well, this is given to us in poetry. So we would expect the poetry to be symbolic, but we might also expect God to speak in symbols to people who were used to that type of discourse. And we'll look into it and see what God actually said to Job when we get to that part. That's way down at the end of the book, so we probably won't get there tonight. But I will note this, because as we read through this, and I've heard young, inexperienced preachers, maybe even some older preachers, make this mistake. The last chapter informs us that God says that what the three men, and even we assume the fourth man, had to say, particularly about God, wasn't right. So there are things in here that we can't rely on. They're not right. They're in the Bible, that's true. Yeah, these novice preachers sometimes will look for a text that says what they want to say, and they'll use it without noticing that it's the words of one of these men and not of Job himself or of God, and therefore of questionable meaning. Anyway. Well, we've got it up. I haven't read out of it yet, so let's start doing that. Prologue, chapter 1, verse 1. There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. And the way they wrote that, it sounds like the first two lines of a limerick, except that Job and Uz don't rhyme. Anyway, he was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away, King James, I think, says, eschewed evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Now, if he was, as some have supposed, the king of Edom, or of the line of Esau, it would stand to reason that he was quite wealthy. And, these weren't all his personal property, but they were the property of him and the people that had attached themselves to him as servants and followers and so forth. But it was considered his in the culture of the time. Job's sons would take turn preparing feasts in their homes, and they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When these celebrations ended, sometimes after several days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular practice. Well, we know that animal sacrifices, don't do anything to absolve us of guilt. But in that time, those people believed that it did, so he was being diligent. He was being thorough. And so, just in case his children did something wrong during their feasting, he would offer sacrifices for them to purify them. One day, the members of the heavenly court, and I'm going to keep the NIV handy here just for reference. The NIV says the angels, and I believe that the King James says the sons of God. Now, are the angels sons of God? Well, yes. Yeah, the King James does say sons of God there. Now, some people suggest that term, the sons of God, relates to the ending of Luke's genealogy of Jesus in chapter 3 of his book. He says Jesus was the son of, everybody imagine Joseph, who was the son of, which was, and frequently the terminology we would use for the relationships that Luke describes might be son-in-law. But at any rate, he goes through that, and he gets back to David. From David back, he abandons the matrilineal outline that he's been following and uses the patrilineal designation that exists in the Old Testament from David backwards. And he gets to which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. So one possible interpretation of this is that the members of the heavenly court, or the angels, or the sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, is that this was a meeting of the first created being from all the planets loyal to God. And they had come to have a council meeting in heaven. They presented themselves before Yahweh, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Footnotes A and B. Footnote A, the sons of God, is what the Hebrew says, and then footnote B, and the Satan, similarly throughout this chapter. So, the accuser is all it says in the Hebrew. So, these, whoever they are, come to present themselves before God. Maybe there's a council meeting, maybe decisions are made, maybe it's just an opportunity to learn on the part of these, to learn from the Creator. At any rate, the accuser, Satan, shows up among them. Now, when we started the Old Testament, we talked about some interesting language in Genesis 1, and particularly in the first 2 verses. And that gave us an insight into something that's going on. Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was tohu wabohu, without form and void, is how the King James renders it, in confusion. Now, we can go elsewhere in the Old Testament. I didn't look this up. We did this at one point. You can go elsewhere in the Old Testament, and you can find in one of the Old Testament prophets where God says that he did not create the world tohu. So then we ask ourselves, well, if he didn't create it that way, how come when he came down here to prepare it as a home for humanity, was it in the condition that he had not created it in? Well, then we get another clue, because then the Spirit of God is moving, in some versions, on the face of the deep. Now, the deep can be taken symbolically, and in the ancient Near East, the sea was a representation, could be used as a symbol for the fearful unknown. So the Spirit of God is doing something over the fearful unknown, the forces of evil, so to speak. And when you look up the Hebrew word used there for what the Holy Spirit was doing, you'll find that it's also used when the Holy Spirit contends with contrary humans. So then you begin to get a sense that there is an issue over the ownership of this planet. And that comes out right here. Where have you come from? Yahweh asked Satan. Well, Satan answered the Lord, the accuser here. I've been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. It's almost as if he's saying, look, you've got a representative from all the other planets here. You don't have a representative from Earth, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to represent earth. This earth is mine. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. My guess is Satan was expecting this, and he had an answer ready. Satan replied to Yahweh, yes, but Job has a good reason to respect you or to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him. And here's a good reason to understand that as this word fear is used, fear is a bad word to use there, because if God has put a wall of protection around him, why does he fear his wall of protection? You don't. You don't fear your wall of protection. He fears God. It's not fear. That's the wrong word. He respects and honors God because God, and this is the accusation now, the only reason he does that is that you are protecting him. Now, how do you think this accuser knew that God had put a wall of protection around Job? I don't think you have to think very hard to answer that question. He hated the man. Well, he hates all of humanity, but he hated this man especially because of his purity. And he went to try and do something about it to fix the situation. He's making me look bad. I've got to stop this. And he got there, and God had forces in place to prevent him from taking any action. And he's upset about it. I could fix this situation. Just let me get in there and touch it, but you don't. But the only reason he honors you, the accuser accuses, is because of this wall of protection. Nothing can happen to him. You've made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Well, this is this being's mode of operation. He's an accuser. In the garden, he accused God. Now, in front of God, he's accusing Job. So, God says, all right, you may test him. The Lord said to Satan, do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. So the accuser left the Lord's presence. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news. Your oxen were plowing with the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided us. They stole all the animals and killed all the farmhands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Interesting that I should mention that literature class, because I mentioned that one of the works of literature that we studied, and I did actually read through the whole thing for that class, was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Full of detail about the whaling trade. So he obviously had done a lot of research in order to produce this thing. But as kind of an introduction to his book, he quotes one of these verses, I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Because at the end of his story, the ship is destroyed, the captain is killed, and everybody on the ship except for him passes away. And he manages to get picked up a few days later by a passing ship, and he's able to tell the story. And so Herman Melville used this verse as part of that. Anyway, while he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Well, the fire of God, well, that was their culture. If it happened, God did it. So if fire fell down from heaven, from their view of things, came down from the sky and destroyed the sheep and the shepherds, well, that was God's doing. It's God's fire. Well, we know it wasn't God's fire. It was the accuser who sent this fire to destroy the sheep and the shepherds, leading one, probably intentionally, to escape and go tell Job what had happened. And that's intentional. That's part of the toxic behavior of this accuser. He's doing this in a form of in a mental health assault. He's wanting to so mess with this man's mind that he will give up everything that he believes in and revert to raw nature of sort. There's only one problem. This man wasn't good because he was trying to be good. He was good because God had been healing him. So there wasn't any of that there for him to revert to when he got messed with. But that's what the accuser thinks. So he's trying to generate this response, and he's very carefully planning what he does for maximum impact on Job's psyche. While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels and killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Give me a moment here. Yes? That was my mistake. I left the room that my wife is in, and I didn't leave the clipboard, mouse pad, and mouse in her reach, so she couldn't do anything until I went in there and gave it to her. So that interruption was my fault. Anyway, so we just read about the powerful wind. I like to think this was probably a tornado. We didn't really understand what tornadoes were even in this country until about 150 to 200 years ago. We saw the destruction this could take, and it took a while for people to study the damage and to determine exactly what was happening. And of course, now we get video of it and we can watch them work, and we know how they work and how their winds are so powerful. But yeah, if a tornado struck the house and you weren't expecting it and you weren't in a safe place, the house would collapse and you very easily could die out of it. So now all of these things, the one right after the other, the events were carefully timed so that the message would show up one right after the other. Again, the goal to put maximum psychological pressure on Job to make him break. And what did Job do? Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Now, we note here, Job said, the Lord took it away. Well, we know better. The Lord didn't take it away. The accuser took it away. The enemy of humanity took it away because he is humanity's enemy. He wants to make trouble for humanity, whatever it is. And whatever opening he finds in God's wall of protection, he will take advantage of it as fully as he can, and he will do his best to make it as painful as he can make it. God allowed it. So in that sense, God took it away because he did give the accuser that opening to enact his rage against humanity. And yet Job did not sin by blaming God. He said the Lord took it away, but he didn't blame God. He didn't wrong. He's not saying it's wrong for God to have done this. He doesn't understand what's going on. He thinks God did it, but God is God. He can do what he wants. If he does it, what can I say? There's a lot of people who have that same fatalistic mindset even in our day, and who, the devil is somebody who makes you do bad things. No, the devil doesn't make you do anything. You choose to do what you want to do. The devil may arrange things in some cases. I don't think it's often. Trying to entice you into something like that. But he didn't make you do it. He has no power to do that. But, when we understand that he hates us, he hates God, and he hates us because we were created in his image. He wants to wipe us out, and God won't let him. And that just chafes him up one side and down the other. Can it be any surprise that bad things occasionally happen to us? God gives him a window, he jumps in and takes advantage. Chapter 2. One day the members of the heavenly court, or the sons of God in the Hebrew, came again to present themselves before Yahweh, and the accuser, and that's all it is, the Hebrew just says the accuser, came with them. This chapter is going to sound very like the previous one. Where have you come from? Yahweh asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Well, then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He's the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil, and he has maintained his integrity even though you urged me to harm him without cause. Now, God didn't harm him. The accuser did that, but the chronicler writes it this way because that's the best understanding he has. Satan replied to the Lord, skin for skin. A man will give up everything he has to save his life. But reach out and take away his health, and he will surely curse you to your face. Notice he doesn't say take away his life. Because if he took away Job's life, Job would be dead, and there wouldn't be any way for Satan to prove his accusations. But notice also that God knows that Satan can't always control himself. So here's what God says, all right, do with him as you please, but spare his life. In other words, God knew that Satan, having the broken, defective character that he had developed through his pride and arrogance and eventually his spreading of lies, that he did not have full control of himself. And if he got to going to Job, even though it was in his interest not to kill Job, he might do it anyway. So God again put a barrier or a limit in place and said, you can go this far. You can strike him. Do with him as you please, but spare his life. There's the wall. There's the barrier. You can't cross that. So the accuser left Yahweh's presence, and he struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." Well, we see instances in our society of what we call suicide by police. Lead police on a high-speed chase for as long as you can do it, and when your vehicle gives out, get out, reach back in, come out with a gun. Yeah, you know what the police are going to do in that situation. And you went in and got that gun with that very purpose in mind. It's called suicide by cop. And so Job's wife seems to be pushing him in that direction. Just make God mad so he'll kill you so you can be put out of your misery. Had the accuser gotten to this woman? And is he using her to multiply the psychological pressure he's putting on Job, the psychological warfare he's conducting against this man of God? But Job replied, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" Well, if it comes from the hand of God, yes, we should accept that, and we should understand that. But, in his day, in his culture, that's how he said it. But the one thing he wasn't about to do was to say that God had messed up and God had done something wrong. So, in all this, Job said nothing wrong. When 3 of Job's friends heard of the tragedy he had suffered, and at least one of them we know from the narrative, from the genealogy given, was Edomite. So he would have been close to these events, possibly even affected by them. And in fact, that may add to some of the bitterness that we hear in his words. When these 3 friends heard of the tragedy he had suffered, they got together and traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz the Temanite. Now, Esau's, I think, firstborn son was Eliphaz, and the firstborn son of Eliphaz was Teman. And then later on, there would have been another descendant named Eliphaz, and because he was descended from Teman, he was a Temanite, which means he's a descendant of Esau. That's very clear here. Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Those other 2 nationalities, if that's what they are, of course they might just refer to cities as well. We're not very clear about it, but these were the 3. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust in the air over their heads to show their grief. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. So there, in 2 chapters, the second one being relatively short, we get the setup for what we're about to read throughout the rest of the book. And let me look at my time here. So we have a ways to go. So now, after 7 days, finally Job speaks. At last Job spoke, and he cursed the day of his birth. He said, "Let the day of my birth be erased, and the night I was conceived. Let that day be turned to darkness. Let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. Let the darkness and utter gloom claim that day for its own. Let a black cloud overshadow it, and let the darkness terrify it. Let that night be blotted off the calendar, never again to be counted among the days of the year, never again to appear among the months. Let that night be childless. Let it have no joy. Let those who are experts at cursing, whose cursing could rouse Leviathan, curse that day." I got a footnote there for Leviathan. That'll be interesting. The identification of Leviathan is disputed, ranging from an earthly creature to a mythical sea monster in ancient literature. Well, we'll talk about that later. At this point, Leviathan is part of their culture. And Leviathan, we will read, is from the sea. And what did the sea represent? The fearful unknown, the forces of evil. So here is this representation of the forces of evil, and there are people who are so good at cursing that they could rouse this wickedness with their very curses. Let those people curse that day, the day I was born. Let its morning stars remain dark. Let it hope for light, but in vain. May it never see the morning light. Curse that day for failing to shut my mother's womb, for letting me be born to see all this trouble. All of us amongst humanity could say something like this. Why did we have to be born here at this time in this world where we would have to face all this nonsense and endure all this suffering and misery? Yeah, I know sometimes we think life's pretty good, and it is. But we say that because we see the things going on around us, and we know our situation, it could be a whole lot worse. So we feel good about our miserable condition just because we know it could get a whole lot worse. Don't worry, things could get worse. So sure enough, they did. Huh? Anyway, reading on. Why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die as I came from the womb? Why was I laid on my mother's lap? Why did she nurse me at her breast? Had I died at birth, I would now be at peace. I would be asleep and at rest. I would rest with the world's kings and prime ministers whose great buildings now lie in ruins. I would rest with princes rich in gold whose palaces were filled with silver. Why wasn't I buried like a stillborn child, like a baby who never lives to see the light? For in death the wicked cause no trouble, and the weary are at rest. You see, when you get to that point, and we're all bound for it, as we've already noted this evening, when we get to that point, there's no more trouble because we don't know anything. So there's nothing for us to see. There's nothing for us to experience. There's no suffering for us to endure. It's all over. For in death the wicked cause no trouble, and the weary are at rest. Even captives are at ease in death, with no guards to curse them. Rich and poor are both there, and the slave is free from his master. What Job is saying here is that death is humanity's great equalizer. Now, we were all created equal. The Creator designed that none of us should be any better than anybody else, any more important than anybody else. We should all be equal. We're not on this planet because it's broken and messed up, we make it even worse by our suppositions. But I don't care if you're a billionaire. When your time comes, you die. And once you're dead, there is no difference between you and between the homeless person who never had a home to lay his head down in. No difference at all. You're perfectly equal. Death, the great equalizer. Rich and poor are both there, and the slave is free from his master. Oh, why give light to those in misery and life to those who are bitter? They long for death and it won't come. They search for death more eagerly than for hidden treasure. They're filled with joy when they finally die and rejoice when they find the grave. Why is life given to those with no future? Those God is surrounded with difficulties. I cannot eat for sighing. My groans pour out like water. What I always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only trouble comes. Now there's a passage in the Bible, a verse there that says, there is no rest, says my God, for the wicked. Well, Job wasn't wicked, and then he's saying, I have no rest, only trouble. And yeah, there's a sense which in this life we find no rest, because whatever we are able to do for ourselves and whatever trouble God allows us to avoid, it's out there. And we can't escape it. Now, we can be like certain rich people. We can shut down our compassions and not be distressed for the people who suffer. But that dehumanizes us. So that's not a good way to go. So then we're stuck living with the worst that humanity can do to itself. And these days, that's pretty bad. So now they've sat there for 7 days. Job has finally spoken. And essentially all he said is, what a miserable life I have. I wish I didn't have it at all. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied to Job, will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out? In the past, you have encouraged many people. You have strengthened those who were weak. Your words have supported those who were falling. You encouraged those with shaky knees. But now, when trouble strikes, you lose heart. You are terrified when it touches you. Doesn't your reverence for God give you confidence? Doesn't your life of integrity give you hope? Can you hear the snark here? Hey, Job, you used to encourage people. You used to help people see that life was worth living, that they could go on, that there were good things out there for them. You strengthened them. But now you've been struck with trouble and you lose heart. Don't you trust God? Don't you have reverence for Him to give you confidence? You've lived a life of integrity. Doesn't that give you hope? These words are being generated with the same approach and goal as the approach that the attacks on Job's goods and then on his own health took. Remember, he got sick and his wife said, well, just curse God and die. Be done with it. I don't like seeing you be so miserable. So now his friends have shown up. Now they're going to carry the same kind of a tune. You were such an upright man. You had a lot to say about God, but now you're in trouble. Look at you. Well, they're going to point out here that they don't think that Job's confidence in God was genuine, that it was done like the accuser said in order to obtain blessings. In other words, Job, you have a transactional relationship with God. That's what the accuser said to God, and now that's what these men are going to double down on. If you really reverence God, wouldn't you have confidence? Your life of integrity, shouldn't that give you hope? Won't God hold you up for that? Stop and think. Do the innocent die? Psst, yes. Don't tell them that. Don't tell them I said that, but yet the innocent die all the time. When have the upright been destroyed? All the time? My experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. Now, there's a grain of truth in this. Whatever a man sows, that he will reap. You reap what you sow. There are consequences for the choices we make in life. And when we make poor choices, poor consequences result. So there is a grain of truth to what this man is saying. My experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. A breath from God destroys them. They vanish in a blast of his anger. The lion roars and the wildcat snarls, but the teeth of strong lions will be broken. The fierce lion will starve for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness will be scattered. In other words, if you have evil intent, God's going to set it right. He does that on a regular basis. He destroys those who destroy others. Well, our premise in this group is that that's a misrepresentation of the character of the Creator. The Creator does not destroy. That's the destroyer's work. And the destroyer is the same as the accuser already pictured here. And we've seen him already in this story out destroying, because that's what he is. That's what he does. That's his character, to destroy. So when destruction takes place, we can look at the destroyer and say, that's his fault. That's his doing. But as we read through this, let's recall that in the time, with the limited knowledge of God that these people had, this sounds like wisdom. They really did believe, because they had that human imposed law concept of morality, that in order for good to survive on this earth, God had to destroy those who were evil. A breath from God destroys them. They vanish in a blast of his anger, and so on and so forth. This truth was given to me in secret, as though whispered in my ear. It came to me in a disturbing vision at night, when people are in a deep sleep. Now, this is one of the verses that we referenced when we did our presentation on truth denying or reality denying strategies, as exemplified in the words of Job's miserable comforters. So here is one of them. So now he's going to talk about secret knowledge. This truth was given to me in secret, as though whispered in my ear. It came to me in a disturbing vision at night, when people were in a deep sleep. Fear gripped me and my bones trembled. A spirit swept past my face, and my hair stood on end. 2 footnotes there. On the spirit or wind, yes. The wind shivers up my spine is another way to put that. The spirit stopped, but I couldn't see its shape. There was a form before my eyes. In the silence I heard a voice say, "Can a mortal be innocent before God? Can anyone be pure before the Creator? Well, there is a truth in that. And if you believe in the utter depravity of man, then you really like this verse, because no mortal can be innocent before God. But what does it take to be innocent before God? It means to be healed, to have your character transformed. And when your character has been fully transformed, then you are pure before the Creator. Does that happen on this earth? Well, people argue about that. I'm not going to get into that. The point is, we eventually can be pure before the Creator, even though, well, by then we won't be mortal any longer, will we? But we will be the creature still. And He will be the Creator. If God does not trust His own angels and has charged His messengers, angels and messengers, same meaning, with foolishness, how much less will He trust people made of clay? Now, I wonder where he got this idea that He's charged His messengers with foolishness. You know, in our day, we say, well, yeah, there was that whole contingent of messengers, heavenly beings, who sided with the accuser when he made his accusations against God. And as we read in Revelation, there was war in heaven, not a literal war with angels slicing at each other with swords, as some people portray it. It was more a war in the mind of God. But the devil, Satan, the dragon, and his angels lost their place and had to leave. They left because it wasn't comfortable for them to leave there anymore. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe there was a sense of that story even at this early stage in Earth's history, because how Eliphaz references, if God does not trust His own angels and has charged His messengers with foolishness, how much less will He trust people made of clay? They are made of dust, crushed as easily as a moth. They are alive in the morning, but dead by evening, gone forever without a trace. Their tent cords are pulled up, and the tent collapses, and they die in ignorance. He's not done. Got to keep going. Cry for help, but will anyone answer you? Which of the angels, or sons of God, does it say? Holy ones. Oh, all right. Which of the holy ones will help you? Surely resentment destroys the fool, and jealousy kills the simple. I have seen that fools may be successful for the moment, but then comes sudden disaster. Their children are abandoned, far from help. They are crushed in court with no one to defend them. The hungry devour their harvest, even when it is guarded by brambles. The thirsty pant after their wealth, 2 footnotes there, B and C. The meaning of the Hebrew of this phrase is uncertain. And then the second part is, as in the Greek and Syriac versions, the Hebrew reads, a snare snatches their wealth. But evil does not spring from the soil, and trouble does not sprout from the earth. People are born for trouble as readily as sparks fly out from a fire. Well, now, we can agree with that. The earth is not the origin of evil. It is broken humanity that is the origin of evil. If I were you, I would go to God and present my case to Him. He does great things too marvelous to understand. He performs countless miracles. He gives rain for the earth and water for the fields. He gives prosperity to the poor and protects those who suffer. He frustrates the plans of schemers, so the work of their hands will not succeed. He traps the wise in their own cleverness, so their cunning schemes are thwarted. Yeah, sure. They find it is dark in the daytime, and they grope at noon as if it were night. He rescues the poor from the cutting words of the strong, and rescues them from the clutches of the powerful. And so at last the poor have hope, and the snapping jaws of the wicked are shut. Sounds good. And you'll hear people say, if God is a God of justice, then he'll stop these people from doing what they're doing, and he'll protect us. Well, God is a God of justice, but his justice isn't like our justice. And God's justice is long term, and God's justice is delayed on this earth because of the special condition in which God has placed it in order to demonstrate for the universe the outcome of the accuser's lies. And so sometimes the poor are not rescued from the cutting words of the strong. And sometimes the snapping jaws of the wicked are not shut. But he's running off as if this is always the case. That's his limited view of the universe, and he's sticking to it. But consider the joy of those corrected by God. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty when you sin. Now, he hasn't been very explicit about it yet. They'll get more so later. But, okay, Job, all this stuff's happened to you. Yeah, it's pretty clear. You've sinned or you wouldn't be in this mess. So the best thing you can do is to go talk to God about it. Confess your sin. Let him correct you. Let him deal with your sin. Do not despise his discipline. For though he wounds, he also bandages. He strikes, but his hands also heal. Well, again, we argue that God does not strike. That's the enemy that does that. But God does heal. From 6 disasters he will rescue you. Even in the 7th he will keep you from evil. There's that Hebrew poetic structure where you name X number of disasters and then X plus 1 disasters or events or whatever. So that's being reflected right here in verse 19. From 6 disasters he will rescue you, even in the 7th he will keep you from evil. He will save you from death in the time of famine, from the power of the sword in time of war. You will be safe from slander and have no fear when destruction comes. You will laugh at destruction and famine. Wild animals will not terrify you. I wonder if he would say this if he was the one that was in these situations he's yammering on about. You will be at peace with the stones of the field, and its wild animals will be at peace with you. You will know that your home is safe. When you survey your possessions, nothing will be missing. You will have many children. Your descendants will be as plentiful as grass. You will go up to the grave at a ripe old age, like a sheaf of grain harvested at the proper time. We have studied life. All right, we're the authorities here. We're the experts. We know what's going on. We have studied life and found all this to be true. He's lying, but he's going to say it that way. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. Yeah. One can almost sense what's going on here, that over the years he has seen Job give counsel and advice to people. He was the king, so he was the one they came to when there were disputes, and if he was a man who eschewed evil, then you couldn't bribe him. So he had all these things to do, and that may have irritated this Eliphaz. He acts like he's got all the wisdom in the world. I'll bet you I can do just as good as he does. So now that the tables have turned here and he has the opportunity, he says, listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. I get to be the expert now. I'm not one, but I get to be one. You know, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. You know, I'm not an expert. I'm not someone who has insight into human nature and can help people overcome their problems. But I'm going to play like it. You need to listen to me, Job. Then Job spoke again. If my misery could be weighed and my troubles be put on the scales, it would outweigh all the sands of the sea. That is why I spoke impulsively, for the Almighty has struck me down with his arrows. Their poison infects my spirit. God's terrors are lined up against me. Again, this is the common cultural viewpoint. It would last for many more years without correction. So we shouldn't be surprised when even a man of God like Job says things like this, because that's what the people thought was true. Don't I have a right to complain? Don't wild donkeys bray when they find no grass, and oxen bellow when they have no food? Don't people complain about unsalted food? Does anyone want the tasteless white of an egg? My appetite disappears when I look at it. I gag at the thought of eating it. Footnote A there. The tasteless juice of the mallow plant, another possibility. All right. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant my desire. I wish he would crush me. I wish he would reach out his hand and kill me. Now, Job's not about to do it himself, but he can wish for it. At least I can take comfort in this. Despite the pain, I have not denied the words of the Holy One. But I don't have the strength to endure. He's beginning to doubt himself here. I have nothing to live for. Do I have the strength of a stone? Is my body made of bronze? No, I am utterly helpless, without any chance of success. One should be kind to a fainting friend, but you accuse me without any fear of the Almighty. Or friend, or he might lose his fear of the Almighty. I kind of like this version because it's not been very explicit yet, but they are accusing him. They're not being kind to him. My brothers, you have proved as unreliable as a seasonal brook that overflows its banks in the spring when it is swollen with ice and melting snow. But when the hot weather arrives, the water disappears, the brook vanishes in the heat. The caravans turn aside to be refreshed, but there is nothing to drink, so they die. The caravans from Tema search for this water. The travelers from Sheba hope to find it. They count on it, but are disappointed. When they arrive, their hopes are dashed. You, too, have given no help. You have seen my calamity, and you are afraid. But why? Have I ever asked you for a gift? Have I begged for anything of yours for myself? Have I asked you to rescue me from my enemies or save me from ruthless people? Teach me, I will keep quiet. Show me what I have done wrong. Honest words can be painful, but what do your criticisms amount to? In other words, they have insinuated that Job's done something wrong, and that's why this has happened to him. And so he says, all right, put your money where your mouth is. Show me what I have done wrong. Well, they can't. They don't know what he's done wrong. They're just sure, because of their preconceived opinions and their ideas, that this wouldn't have happened to Job if he hadn't done something wrong. Therefore, he's done something wrong. We don't have to tell him what he did wrong. We don't have to prove it, because it's obvious by the circumstances that he's done something wrong. Except they're wrong about that. This has happened to him specifically because he's an upright man who eschews evil. We know that, but they don't. And right now, neither does Job. Show me what I have done wrong. Honest words can be painful. But what do your criticisms amount to? Do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry of desperation. You would even send an orphan into slavery or sell a friend. Even gamble over another way they think that Hebrew might be rendered. Look at me. Would I lie to your face? Stop assuming my guilt, for I have done nothing wrong. I have done no wrong. Do you think I am lying? Don't I know the difference between right and wrong? More from Job. Is not all human life a struggle? Our lives are like that of a hired hand, like a worker who longs for the shade, like a servant waiting to be paid. I too have been assigned months of futility, long and wearing nights of misery. Lying in bed, I think, when will it be morning? But the night drags on, and I toss till dawn. My body is covered with maggots and scabs. My skin breaks open, oozing with pus. This sounds like a very literal description of his current condition. My days fly faster than a weaver's shuttle. They end without hope. What's a weaver's shuttle? Well, that's the thread carrier that the weaver will slide between the other threads to weave. So they pull them across, push it in, switch the up and down threads, and then run the shuttle back through again. And it has to move quickly in order to produce the cloth, back and forth quickly. I remember seeing an industrial weaving operation once when I was working as a radio newscaster. This guy was promoting his brand and his methods and his stuff, and he let us all come in and see his factory. And they had all sorts of industrial looms. And it included a little one that produced a strip of cloth about that wide. The little thing, I'd just roll it out real quickly. But there was also one that was designed to do cloth something in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 feet wide. And they had to have a special area of the walkway guarded off because the shuttle arm would swing back and forth far enough to reach that long distance. So you had to have an area where that could swing back and forth rapidly in order to produce cloth at anything like a decent rate. So it would be dangerous to be in that area. So there were gates and bars there to keep people out. So when he speaks about flying faster than the weaver's shuttle, the weaver in those days, they did it by hand, would have to throw it through to get it through from one side to the other. They didn't use, I don't think, so they'd have that shuttle and it would shoot back and forth. He said, my days are flying faster than that. They end without hope. Oh God, remember that my life is but a breath, and I will never again feel happiness. You see me now, but not for long. You will look for me, but I will be gone. Just as a cloud dissipates and vanishes, those who die will not come back. Those who go down to Sheol, which is the place of the dead, so it's a very good translation of it. They are gone forever from their home, never to be seen again. I cannot keep from speaking. I must express my anguish. My bitter soul must complain. Am I a sea monster or a dragon that you must place me under guard? I think my bed will comfort me and sleep will ease my misery. But then you shatter me with dreams and terrify me with visions, or nightmares in other words. I would rather be strangled, rather die than suffer like this. I hate my life and don't want to go on living. Oh, leave me alone for my few remaining days. What are people that you should make so much of us, that you should think of us so often? For you examine us every morning and test us every moment. You won't leave me alone, at least long enough for me to swallow. If I have sinned, what have I done to you? a watcher of all humanity. Now that's an interesting concept. Now Job is going to maintain throughout that he has not sinned, and I don't think he's saying he's not a sinner. He's not a fallen human being. He's saying that by the standards that I'm aware of, I am not living outside of God's boundaries. But even if I have, he says, what have I done to you? Now, there is that theory of the atonement out there that whenever we sin, we're breaking God's law, and so we offend God by breaking his law, and so he has something against us just on that. But Job doesn't seem to take that approach. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of all humanity? Why make me your target? Am I a burden to you? The Hebrew reads target, so that I'm a burden to myself. All right. Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? For soon I will lie down in the dust and die. When you look for me, I will be gone. Now, one of the things that I think we're going to see as we go through this book is we're going to see a development within Job's mind of who God is and what he's all about. And this question at the last verse of this chapter hints at what God actually does. Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? Well, that's the business that God is in. That's what he does. Job hasn't really caught on to that yet, but as we move on through these passages, we will see his concept of divinity, of the Creator, grow and develop and flesh itself out until he's able to express things with great confidence. And the clock says that we're about out of time here. And since we're at the beginning of a chapter, I think this is probably a good place to stop. So, we've read the prologue, the introductory story. We've read Job's first comments. We've read Eliphaz's response. And now we have read Job's response to this first speech from Eliphaz. But now they're going to play tag team. And this is the most unfair tag team there could be, because Job's all by himself and his friends have two others they can tag off on to assault Job with their words. And they're going to do that. They're going to spell each other off one after the other. And each time Job by himself must respond to their criticism and their snark and their belittling and their detachment from reality. So, like I say, that's the time we have this evening. We thank you for joining us. Lord willing, we will have a sermon presentation prepared, and that will be, let's see, this is the 3rd, so a week from now would be the 10th, so on the 11th, if I've done my calculations correctly, at 11 Central Time. We hope to have something prepared and ready to present. But otherwise, on Friday night, we will do this, and we've gotten through the first 7 chapters. There's 42. 7 goes into 42 6 times. This means it's going to take us 6 weeks to get through this. We'll see. Maybe we'll go a little faster through some of the rest of it. But at any rate, that's where we are. That's where we'll be, right here, same place. 6:30 Central Time is our normal start time. And just a brief word here. I didn't say this before. Let me go grab something real quick. when we live stream, we like to make it possible for people to be here and connected and listening when we begin the actual content. And so for that purpose, we have about 10 minutes of music leading into it. And the music, that's just me. I'm not very good at it. I make a lot of mistakes. I'm a lousy pianist, but it's what's available. I have a piano right here in the room with me, so that's what we do. And it used to be I would go through and select stuff I thought I could play pretty well, but for the last quite a while I've been playing through a hymnal. And the hymnal I have been playing through is this one. This was copyright 1976. It was published by Paragon Associates out of Nashville, Tennessee. And one of the head editors for this was a man named Fred Bach. And here is the editorial board. Fred Bach, general editor. Brian Jeffrey Leach, assistant editor. Fred Bach mostly provided arrangements in this hymnal. Brian Jeffrey Leach provided some compositions in it. William J. Gaither, I bet you don't know that name. Gloria Gaither, Ron Huff, Wayne Erickson, Robert McKenzie, and Dorothy Sickle. Those were the people who put this together. Well, if Bill Gaither was involved, then no wonder there's got a lot of his songs in it, right? Anyway, so I've been playing through it, and we have reached the section on the second coming. You may have noticed that the hymns that we played this evening were all resurrection hymns until the last one, which is a setting of the words, Christ is coming, let creation from her groins and travail ceased. Set to the hymn tune, Bryn Califaria by William Owen. Anyway, that's what that was all about. I'm just going through it, one page after the other. So if you've got a copy of that hymnal and you want to follow along, I suppose you could. We just crossed over into the 300s. So, like I say, we plan to be back here, Lord willing, next week, 6:30 Central Time, where we'll continue with the Book of Job, followed the next day by a sermon presentation. And until that time, we say goodbye and God bless.